2 people on right now. Oh, it's just Twitch bugging me. Okay, so I see 2 people on right now. 3, all right, we've grown 50%. I'll wait for a few more people to file on, and then I will get going. So, what I will talk about, so reminder, this is the last lecture of the semester, which basically, you know, like next week you don't have classes because you can go and you know, you have extra time to travel to go home. You also didn't have fall break, so it's kind of mushing it all together. You know, not that this has anything to do with the class, but just, you know, if you can, you know, Kent State is providing testing, so go check out like what the resources are for that before you go home to keep everybody safe. So just a reminder to do that. Yeah, I don't, again, I'm just letting people trickle in. You know, I've been slow with grading, catching up with grading this past week just because there's like a bunch of administrative stuff we've had to do for, I've shared the art museum stuff with you all. So, you know, that's stuff that has been taking up a lot of our time. We also have, you know, like school surveys to do, which take up time. So thank you everybody for your patience with me. Again, animations are looking pretty good. We are at the point where things are starting to switch over again to the assignments will like line up with your final project, which is that animatic. And I know the one for this week is to take some like simple motion and set it to music, but like set it to different pieces of music. So the way you basically do that is like if you animate like a walk cycle or a run cycle for a character, and then you could make it like, you know, you can have it have like sports movie action music and then maybe some like horror movie music. Your TA is going through the background. But, you know, just explore the different, like you make one animation and then you set it to a few different pieces of music to like explore the emotional context you can give that one motion. Like I said, if you did a basic run cycle, you could have it be like run from the monster, and then you could have it like run to win state, and then you could have it be like run to escape the rolling boulder. You know, you could you know, make it different things depending on your, but you only have to do one actual animation. So that's the thing for this week. And then again, everything else is just animatic. Post Thanksgiving, you know, it's going to switch completely to whatchamacallit, to project. So, you know, mostly these periods will be like, you know, we won't have lectures, but I will be obviously here to answer questions. And if anybody does need to schedule time to chat like one-on-one via Discord, you know, again, I'm open to do that. So just let me know, especially if you do want like eyes, you know, like to do a screen share and want eyes on your project. I'm happy to do that. So let me know if there are any questions on that. Other than that, I'm going to get started. It seems like we're kind of capping out at 6 today. So I'm going to get started on lecturing on the topic, which is sound effects and music. Now, I'm going to go, oh, hi, 7th. We have not capped out. All right, I'm going to go close my door. So the approach for this lecture, because it's like outside the scope of this individual lecture to be like, here's music theory, right? So I'm not going to be able to teach how to music in an entire in one single lecture, and especially since like I am not musical. I'm not a great sound designer myself, but I can talk about how to access and manage these resources and how to best think about adding these things to your project and how to work with sound designers. So I mean, I was once the manager of a sound design team on a game because I happened to have everybody's phone number. That was like the amount of connection to sound design I had, is that I knew the people that I wanted to have help us with sound design. So like, sometimes that is like all it really takes to be the person in charge of something. So I can talk about like how to handle this stuff. So we can talk about it mainly from that point of view today. So the three topics I want to cover are dialogue, sound effects, and music, and which seem like very broad. They are, and I will tell you this: if you want to become really experienced with some of these specific areas, in our Bachelor of Science Animation Game Design degree. By the way, I guess I can tell everybody now, because like the official word went out Friday, but we did get our accreditation approval for the program, so now we are officially accredited and we are officially animation game design. And talk to your advisor, like if you're on that CDAG, engineering technology CDAG track, that animation game design can be applied retroactively. So, ask your advisors about that if you want to avoid certain classes. That again, they would know more about the advising part of that than I would, but that is my understanding. Yeah, we're a real boy. We're a real, So yeah, we finally can be the Bachelor of Science, which is excellent, and that took a lot of writing and rewriting. That's a lot of what we've been also working on this semester in the background is trying to get this done. It was hard. But in doing that, we can really push this like art forward perspective that we have been talking about, so that we can again increase the your expertise. We can increase the quality of the program, take it away from the sort of like tool first mentality into this sort of like the art of animation type of mentality. So let's talk about dialogue. And a lot of this, by the way, again, is from your textbook, Ideas for the Animated Short. So I'd suggest going and checking that out. So first of all, we're going to start off with dialogue. Well, what is dialogue? Well, simply enough, it's spoken words and conversations that happen in a film. And, so you don't need dialogue to make an animated short. In fact, a lot of student films especially do not have dialogue. There are a lot of student films, and I only mention this because like you're students and you're making films and you're going to make films in your animation project course and your capstone and all this other stuff. So don't feel that you need dialogue. And the reason it often doesn't happen is because, you're not actors, and it's a question of if you can get access to voice actors. Now, this is a situation where I think community is really important. If you're, those of you in my Games for Education class, we had a whole lecture on like integrating with your community. I think this is an opportunity where community is really important because, you could talk to, within the Kent State community, like maybe an acting student or a theater student that needs something in their portfolio, and then, maybe work with them to be a voice actor. And then, maybe both of you agree that like you can put that work into your portfolio, they for voice work, you for the animation, that kind of thing. So think about those things before you try to act this out yourself. I included pictures from this short that was mentioned in the book, The Animator in the Seat, by Eric Drobile from Ringling College of Art and Design. It's a neat short. It's kind of funny, a little cynic. It's surprisingly cynical for a student work. I'm like, ooh, this person doesn't seem like a very happy person, but it's a good short. The voice acting, you can tell, was done by maybe like a person who wasn't a voice actor, but it is great that the dialogue is written well, such that it gives context to actions, and we'll talk about how it does that in a really good way. Dialogue can condense and drive the plot and can lend reality to your scene. So dialogue's not required for scenes, and a lot of what we've talked about is based on sort of motion and acting and pantomime, but writing good verbal jokes, or I mean, it doesn't have to be jokes, but writing good dialogue is an important part of this animation process. So it's a skill that I would say, like, think about for your future works. We're not going to focus on it again in this particular class, mainly because, again, that this is something that you could do in some of our electives, to expand that and really focus on it. I don't want to not do that skill justice by being like, I've given you a lecture, now you're an expert. This is something that I think, like, I want you to be exposed to this world, and then maybe, if this is something you're interested in developing, kind of find the path through creative writing and acting and things like that. But again, we're going to talk about how we plan for dialogue and how we integrate dialogue. Because if we think about this as, I don't want to say directors, even though we're kind of treating you like directors, but the joke about certain film and animation schools is that, like, oh, they only train directors, so everybody thinks they're a director, and I don't want to do that to us. But in terms of somebody who's like putting together a short creatively and being the animator, this is kind of the position you're in. So, like, how do you plan for dialogue? Well, let's go back to our discussion of the workflow of animation. Obviously, you're going to create the script. You're going to create like your story treatment, and then you through that you hammer out a script, or you have a writer hammer out a script. That script is then turned into a radio play. That's when you have your voice actors come together and they actually act out the dialogue. They do X amount of takes of it, and then that is given, like, from that's where you develop your animation, like storyboards, and then your X sheets and everything like that. So dialogue is one of the first steps of animation when you are including dialogue. Having a script is the first thing you do, and then that's followed up, of course, with these other steps that are built around the fact that you record really early. And we talked about the X sheet, so that column with the red letters the black letters, and then immediately to the right is the red letters. The black letters are the lines of dialogue, written out by frame, and the letters in red are the mouth shapes, the phonemes of the dialogue. So, this is how we plan and start to integrate dialogue, is that we take the script, we take the recording, we listen to it, we write down, like, at what second are they going to start saying certain words, and then we plan the mouth shapes out, and then those give us, our directions on, like, how to animate and what to animate. Which is kind of laborious, and is kind of, it's laborious and it's tedious. And, like, don't get me wrong in saying that, don't think that I'm not, I'm just being like, oh yeah, that's all you do. It is kind of a tedious process. And again, that's where you see a lot of shorts made by individuals or small teams not include dialogue, or as in the case of like Death of an Egg, it's that's very limited dialogue where they have just like the one or two lines of like, hey, who is it? So the scope is kept very minimal. So this is something that you want to think hard about, you know, when you have your like epic idea, maybe you tone it back when you are dealing with this, because it becomes a scope issue and a project management issue. Again, this is why you don't see a lot of dialogue in student films, because that's a very small team and scope is an issue. As opposed to like a situation where you're making a feature film or even like a short where there's and even in like professional shorts, there's not a lot of dialogue. If you see a lot of Pixar shorts especially, there's really not a lot of, if any, dialogue. But when you have a feature film, that's where you have lots of money, hundreds of animators, things like that. And this might even be somebody's whole job. So I guess before we get going on this, are there any questions about anything related to this in particular? So I'm going to keep going, but please put your questions in here. So phonemes are, again, they're mouth shapes that correspond to sounds in dialogue. And I want to emphasize that there is not one set of master mouth shapes or preferred. There's preferred sounds that you create shapes for, but depending on which source you use and which, reference chart you use, you're going to see lots of different things. There's not one set of rules. And I mention this not to kind of make anybody feel like they're out in the desert, but I mention this to allow you to understand that if you lip sync in your animation, it's probably going to be okay. If we think about, Japanese cartoons, and I'm not trying to pick on Japanese cartoons, but they don't do phonemes of any sort in at least television cartoons. The character's mouths just open and close. And, that's a style consistent with those cartoons, and people still love them. In feature films, you will see those happen, and I believe that in Akira... So there's speaking of which, there's a podcast I listen to called Retronauts, and they recently did an episode on Akira, which is very worth listening to. One of the guys on that podcast has his own animation podcast called What a Cartoon. Also worth a listen. But, in feature films like Akira, and I know that's a very old one, but it's kind of like one of the classics of Japanese animation feature film. They will spend the money to do lip sync. But so really this is a way to say if you're not going to do lip sync, you can probably get away with it, but your quality is increased. Again, it comes at a price. Obviously it becomes time, scope, and later on in your career, money. But so phonemes, there are some basic mouth shapes. My recommendation would be to, even do a cursory Google image search and try to find. You'll see lots of these different phoneme charts. Your books will, animation books also have lots of phonemes. I'm pretty sure Survival Kit has a phoneme chart. It might. I need to go check on that. See, I don't do a lot of animation with these, so I know where the run cycle and all those other the jumps pages are, and I don't always have to look at the mouth, the speaking portions of it. But, rely on those sources. So this one, for example, is from the cartoon animation book by Preston Blair. And, I put his in there in particular, not because like, oh, this is the one, but to point out a thing about style. So if you buy this book, and it's one of the like great old books of animation, it's a really good book, but it's also like the thing that will strike you about it is that it is Disney Studios in the 40s. This is this type of book. And people have walked away from this book a little bit because of that, because it is like, if you're going to draw a cute character, it must look like this. It kind of, it evangelizes a style so much, such as to say that it is the right style. Whereas if you look at Richard Williams, my impression whenever I flip through that book is like, wow, this person can draw everything, and it's just amazing. So it almost like allows you to find your own style. So phonemes can vary by style. And one that I shared, that is taught by animator John Kelly, is this sort of like basic, 9 pose for 9 different sounds, like phoneme chart. Like this is a good basic phoneme chart. So, you can go as minimal as that. And this will give you a variety of mouth sounds that will get you pretty far. We looked at this image before from Bravest Warriors, and again, this is a set of mouth shapes that will get this character pretty far, and you can do a lot of different phonemes with this. One that I have seen floating around a lot, and this is from the Thinking Animation website, which is a really great animation website, but this idea of like a 15 mouth shape phoneme chart that goes through like e, oo. So like you'll see a lot of these, for example, like oo, w, and qu. They all go to this mouth shape. And so you'll see like a lot of these instances of these mouth shapes covering several sounds. But, these are for all the different sounds you potentially make. But I've seen like 15 floating around as like a standard. It's obviously like more complicated than that, but it'll get you, it's pretty flexible. I also appreciate this image because in like on the f and v to like the b and p, you've got a guy like, photobombing her as she's doing her animation homework. So, again, and again, I would go to this thinkinganimation.com. It's a really great website. I've pulled a lot of content from it for this class. It's a really great resource. But this assignment that they posted, where people take like photographs of themselves doing the different mouth shapes as photo reference, and remember we talked about photo references. Here's another example of it. This is a good example. So I'd definitely check that out. And on the flip side, you can go really complicated, and that's okay. Now remember, these are not necessarily by letter, these are by mouth sound. So, the dialogue will have certain letters, but you can match certain letters with, like certain letters will create, I guess this is the best one for it. If you see a letter in dialogue like T, Z, D, N, and S, there's one mouth shape for all of those. I guess what I'm getting at is like if you're going down your X sheet and you are going through your dialogue, you can easily post like, all right, this is the mouth shape we're going to use for this sound. This is the mouth shape we're going to use for that sound. It's not about memorization. It's about, just knowing what to put where and having a nice reference in front of you. So, find your reference. If you were to do this, I would print out one of these charts. I would hang it on your bulletin board or your wall in front of you, and I would be able, I would look at it as you're going through it if you were to do it like, drawing or animating in 3D. So speaking of 3D, this obviously exists in 3D. One thing that's a time saver in 3D is you have this concept of blend shapes. They're called blend shapes in Maya, morphs in 3D Studio Max, and shape keys in Blender. I don't know why Blender doesn't call them blend shapes, but this is where we are. This is how CG works. But basically what you do is you would create like a bunch of different copies of a mesh, like a head mesh, and then you'd, form it in such a way that it would have that, mouth shape. And then you would record that as a shape key, and then it would give you a little slider so that you could, as you're going through your script, you can just like turn up that slider for that phoneme pose, and that will help you do dialogue. If you're doing this in 2D, again, this is where an XSheet comes in handy because, well, XSheet comes in handy for 3D as well. But, on frame 47, you have to be at the, phoneme for S, right? So, you'd go there and like doing anything with key posing and with keyframing and in-betweens and things like that, you'd, draw what's in between each of those sound key poses. That was a lot. Ask me 2 questions about phonemes. I realize, again, this is the sort of thing where, if we had like an animation theory 2 or like advanced animation, this is like where you do that later. But I want to make sure that we cover it so that you have a good grounding in this, and then you can like go off and explore it. Because, if you're going to be a professional animator, you'll need to know about this. You will encounter this. So I want to make sure you're at least set on the right track. So ask me 2 questions, before we see a slide that's not Disney or Bugs Bunny. From me for once. While you catch up and ask questions, I'm going to go grab my copy of Animator Survival Kit and look for the page that has dialogue. My 4-year-old drew The Mandalorian, by the way. All right, 2 questions. Page 304 is where they start talking about dialogues, a dialogue, and yes, that's right, because this is the one where he almost talks about the thief and the cobbler, because he's talking about Vincent Price, and he like very nearly draws Zigzag, Vincent Price's character Zigzag. So 304. Mandalorian. Ta-da! Margaret's Mandalorian with Baby Yoda. So would you always make a full phoneme set of shapes, or is it like is there a base set for simpler or cheaper animation? Are there shapes that you can skip if you want to? So again, it's sort of based on style. I would try to go for at least this. This is like 9 shapes, and even this is like 10. So it's not. as extensive. Actually, this one is also 9. So it really seems like 9 is a sort of base set, but it gives you a good set of stuff. This one is overemphasized right here. And again, like I put this in specifically for style. So if you search phoneme mouth chart, you're going to find this image. This is a pretty solid image. Again, this is why we assigned some of the textbooks and recommended texts we did, because they do have this stuff. Will is upset. Let me see if... I would go to, yeah, I would get one of these like charts off Google image search, and then honestly I would go to what I like about what the Williams book has here is that it's sort of the pro tips of this, where it's like, you know, here's like use phonemes but also understand these like shortcuts as well. So let's see. I'm a Japanese minor, and the sounds are way more limited than English. So I think about maybe there's the difference. Yeah. So really good point about differences depending on language. And this is why you do see the dubbing change for different languages, again in Japanese. You do bring up a good point. Is there a basic set for simpler or cheaper animation? This is where, again, you get a smaller set. When you do simpler or cheaper, everything is based on, you know, budget and scope. So if you have the need to do cheaper animation, that's where you're probably going to use a smaller phoneme set. And then if you want to do a bigger phoneme set like this one, that's where you're going to have way more flexibility, but it's also going to be, again, probably more expensive because you have to spend the time with this. Would you suggest the video reference of mouth shapes or a mouth chart, or is it really just preference? So I mean, I don't understand why you wouldn't have... So this is an interesting question, because I'm given this question a lot. It's like, well, can we do this instead of that? I guess my answer is like, why would you do one or the other? Why don't you just do it all, right? You know, because like it's useful to have this basic mouth chart, and it doesn't really cost you anything to go search for a mouth chart like this or one from a textbook. And then if you want to do a video reference, you know, that's useful too. But it's going to be more helpful for you to have a set. It's going to be a more efficient workflow. I think it seems like what you're asking is like, should you just act out the scene and then copy your face poses from the video reference? That could be fine, but I think the problem with that would be that you would be like making every line of dialogue bespoke to what you do, and that turns into an enormous amount of cost. So if you're doing drawn spoken dialogue, that's why you have this sort of like pre-made set of mouth shapes, so that you know anytime that you're going to make that mouth sound, it's always going to be the same shape. It actually would be cheaper to do it that way than to, like, again, videotape yourself, play back the video. You know, because then you're making videos for every scene. You're basically like shooting the movie and then like drawing the movie. So if that makes sense, why that would be extra work. So, you know, that being said, if you do make yourself a chart like that and you act it out like this person is doing, that could be enormously useful, because except you only have to do that once instead of, again, acting out the entire movie. I think I'm understanding the question right. So again, here's somebody doing like a super duper complicated one. And again, like if you are doing CG animation, you don't always have to. You like pre-make these by storing them, so you don't have to draw them every time. Those are great questions, though. And don't feel... I'm going to move on, but don't feel like you can't keep them coming. So what is the function of dialogue? So dialogue is, you don't need to have dialogue in your movies, as we've talked about. That's, that's like... Yeah. Somebody says, the person who asked about the preference said, thank you. Yeah, I mean, really think about the goal is, well, the goal is to make great art, but there's also another goal, which is to do less work. Or I should rather say, like, work smart, not hard. And so, and you'll get better at this as you continue in your careers. But, like, you will learn how to... we do this even in Nemo, which is like supposed to give off the sense of being this like oozing with production value thing. We take so many shortcuts, but we are experienced enough to know how to hide those shortcuts or make the shortcuts not super obvious. So it's a skill you learn over time. So the function of dialogue. Your cartoons don't need dialogue. Roadrunner and Coyote, right? And Wile E. Coyote, no dialogue except for that one time, and those are masterful cartoons. So you don't need it, but it can serve a few different purposes. So there's like setting the mood. The book. Your textbook, the Ideas for the Animated Short, has this really great list in it of like, it's a short list, but it's a good evocative list of like, does your short begin with some sort of dialogue? So this is, last time we talked about the sort of like establishing shot where you establish the scene, but sometimes establishing shots are also accompanied with some dialogue, and that also sets up the moment, where you might have it outside, but you hear the characters in the scene that it's about to transition to say something like, I don't have your money. And then it switches to the scene, and then you get the dialogue. But having that first line, or, it says like maybe a mother is singing a lullaby to her kids or something like that. That sets... That almost is like a verbal establishing shot for your story, right? So it can further set the mood of a scene. So it's good for that kind of functioning. It can reveal a character. You can have dialogue that reveals a goal or motivation. I spelled motivation, motivation. Way to go, spelling. It can reveal attitude towards the situation, reveals the motive of the character, what they're trying to accomplish. Or it can be like if the character would say one thing at the beginning of the movie and another thing at the end of the movie, that can reveal transformation over time. This is the job of your writers, ultimately, or you if you're the writer, but, without falling into the trap, and again, this isn't a course on writing, but without falling into the trap of characters just spouting exposition at each other, you can accomplish a lot in dialogue that gives context. You can also drive the plot forward. So, you could have lines of dialogue where a villain says, you haven't seen my full form, this isn't even my final form, kind of thing. And that creates curiosity, right? You're like, oh, what's this character's final form like? So you can do different things with creating tension and conflict, and have like reveals through dialogue. So dialogue is useful. You don't need it, but if your story is better with it, you can do a lot with dialogue. Other things you can do with dialogue is drive resolution. So like, dialogue is helpful for being like, last time we talked about Scrat from Ice Age, and those shots are so good at being like Scrat wants the acorn, right? So they're composed such that he wants the acorn. His needs are very simple, and that can be done in pantomime. But if the needs are not as simple, like this character wants, I don't know, fulfillment, or to be the strongest, or that kind of thing, that's going to maybe require some dialogue. Maybe again, you could have like pantomime Goku look at a trophy and like dream a little bit or something like that. But maybe lacking that, you could have him also be like, I want to be the strongest fighter. So another really important thing of dialogue is to create subtext, which is a lot of this runs into, and I mentioned this, like the sort of exposition text where the characters barf exposition at each other, even though if this is the world that they live in, they would know things. When you create subtext, you do the thing where you're using dialogue to demonstrate an emotion, but you're not necessarily saying it literally. So as an example, that the animator in the seat short that I took some images from your textbook, the story is that the animator is tired and doesn't want to animate anymore. He's just kind of over it. He's overworked. He's stressed. He wants to take a break, but his chair imprisons him. And keeps him at his desk animating. So that's the subplot. So, at no point does the animator in this short say like, gee golly, animation is hard and I'm bored and I'm tired and I'm stressed and I want to go home. At no point does he literally say that. What happens is he acts, so he does like a slouch. He does a lot of like, he picks up a pot of coffee so as to drink it, and then it's empty, so then he throws it in the trash among other pots, entire pots of coffee. So you get these like cues, and his workplace is disheveled. So you get the cues of overwork and the context clues of overwork, without him sitting there and being like, I'm overworked and tired. It shows you him being overworked and tired. So it's like show don't tell. So you're like, well, I thought we were talking about how useful dialogue can be. Well, because the animator is following the rule of show don't tell, he uses dialogue to just kind of like twist that knife a little bit, which is a violent and dark metaphor to use, but he kind of like ratchets it up a little bit because he doesn't have to waste dialogue on being like, I'm tired. He can say something like, I used to like bears, and then it shows you the computer screen of him animating this sort of mindless animation loop of a cartoon bear. So it creates the subtext of overwork and tiredness and boredom, but it does so by even kind of like accentuating it more and giving you a more complex emotion of, I've ruined this thing I liked because I had to animate it. Now, again, this is a lot of you might be like, oh no, what am I getting myself into? This is a really cynical cartoon, right? And there's an element of this in any project you do. There really is. But dang, I hope this person's okay. It seems unhappy. And then the other thing you can do is like, you can do narration. Now be careful with narration because it falls into the same show don't tell trap, but it can move the plot forward. It can be a stylistic thing, as long as you're concise. It doesn't confuse the viewer, and it doesn't like do the work of showing not telling for you. Yeah. So, ask me one question about dialogue, and then we can move on. So, what's interesting while you're waiting for questions, what I found interesting is looking through Richard Williams. Um, he talks about like the fun there can be in, and I think this applies to motion too. The fun there can be in lip syncing, um, because certain characters are fun because you get to let loose with them a little bit. I think villains are fun for that reason. You don't have to make them like you don't have to work with pulled back emotions as much with a villain, even if the villain has complex emotions. You can kind of like they're a villain. You can be a little more out there. Um, and he talks about doing Vincent Price's lip sync, the character from The Thief and the Cobbler that he was, is a villain, very overemphasized, like facial emotions and drawing style. So I think in those situations, it could be really fun to animate some of these types of, some of these mouth movements. And that's actually one of the reasons, like, so Batman the Animated Series from when I was growing up had excellent dialogue. It was excellent at doing all of these things that dialogue can do. But I can only imagine how fun it must have been to animate Mark Hamill's Joker. Like that seems like that would be a character that would be a really interesting character to do, just because his facial expressions are so extreme, and then Mark Hamill's voiceover for it is just incredible. All right, one question. Ask me a question. Come on. Because after this, we've got sound effects. Do I have a favorite face animation in film or one that blew me away? Oh, Genie's really good in Aladdin. Um, yeah, Genie is great. Really, like, oh man, Disney villains are good in general. Like, Scar is good. All those, like, you know, Disney Renaissance era villains are really excellent. Like, Scar is good. Genie's not a villain, but he has the similar, because he's like the wacky character. He can similarly not be, Aladdin's got to be kind of straightforward. Genie can be, bow. All the villains can be kind of out there. Like Ursula is really good. Scar is really good, etc., etc. Again, the Joker in animated series, he's a really fun one because he's not toned down. He's the Joker. Yeah, I think, and I guess, I don't know, you could also say the same of like Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs characters, because they can be out there. They're wacky. Mark Hamill's a wonderful person. I love all the fun and weird characters he voices. I actually have a story about before, when I say like I have a story, I've never met Mark Hamill, so don't get too excited. But there was a time where, so my favorite Batman comic is The Long Halloween, which if you've not read is, I've talked about The Long Halloween. It's that like murder mystery one, and it has really good coloring and layout and everything. So that's my favorite one, and I can't remember if I told you this story or not. I'll tell it again. There was a acting group where I used to live in Maryland that would do these like really interesting pop culture plays. So they did this like really good Oregon Trail play one time. But I mean, these are like serious plays that happen to be based on pop culture. So, it wasn't like a super duper fandom thing. It actually had like a lot of really interesting like emotional cues and things like that. But they did a dramatic reading of The Long Halloween, um, which was really good. And I remember, like, when I read The Long Halloween, I can hear Mark Hamill's voice in my head coming out of that Joker because it is written so much like that version of him. And, you know, I had to like kind of hold myself back going into. I was really excited to go see this, but I was talking with a friend of mine. I was like, yeah, I got to remember that the actor is going to do his own Joker, and thus I can't, like, I shouldn't expect that voice to come out of them. So I need to like temper my mental image of what we're about to watch. Um, so then, I go in, we sit down, and they're like going through they're doing the play, and it's really awesome. And they get to the Joker scene, and the guy goes like, "Hello, bats," and I'm like, he does this pitch perfect Mark Hamill Joker, and because dramatic readings are like you're sitting in chairs reading it, right? No, they did a whole scene. They did like, because in the comic, the Joker gets in a plane and is going to try to like poison Gotham from a plane with like presents thrown out of the plane or something like that, because he's like the Christmas comic. That's like the one that takes place during Christmas. And so like they had a few chairs lined up and they pantomimed like they were on an airplane. So yeah, no, that's but it was funny being like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I wanted. Yay, Mark Hamill Joker. Anyway, so yeah, let's talk about sound effects. So again, I'm kind of, in case you can't tell, I'm leaning on the textbook a little bit. It has a decent chapter on some of this, but they don't talk about sound effects for too long. But they do have some really nice choice quotes that I pulled out. One of them is, "If you don't pay as much attention to the development of the music and the sound as you do the development of your story and hero, it can make or break the piece." And it talks a lot about dialogue. It doesn't talk a lot about sound. And that's because sound and music are their own fields of study. This is why, we offer the opportunity to work with people from the digital media production program, the DMP program, which, by the way, still stands. Like, let me know if you want some sound for your animatic. We can hook you up with them. Especially, if you have a storyboard to work with, we can send them that material and get you going. But, that is its own field. And I want you to understand that, because if you can understand that, two things can happen. If you're good at this, I would pursue it. If you find that you're actually, a very good composer or sound designer, it's like when I was in high school, I swam throughout like middle school, high school, college, and everybody does freestyle, like the front crawl stroke. And so trying to advance in like state tournaments is really hard in freestyle because everybody does freestyle. But, there was a period in my senior year of high school where I was good at butterfly, which is like this one, the Michael Phelps one, for about like 3 weeks. I don't know why, but that 3 weeks got me to the district meet, which like our district in Northeast Ohio at the time, I don't know what the scene is now, but like it was fast enough where it was like only these like people that were going to end up on like Olympic trials teams were going to go to state. So like I was pretty happy to go to district because I ended up being able to go because I did butterfly to get there. And, I could get in a less crowded field. So like everybody and their mom wants to be a concept artist or an environmental artist or something like that. And that's not to say like to discourage you from trying to get through to that, but it's also worth taking stock of your skills to really think about like where in your area of interests or abilities can you maybe, punch through a little bit. So if you're a good environment artist, but like maybe you've got a special talent for texturing in Substance or something like that, you can punch through in there. Uh, if you're this is where like technical artists, so rigging and things like that's another thing where you'll have a really good chance of getting hired. Interface art, so like UI art, user interface art, or UX design, those are really important. And again, it's not just the same thing everybody does. And sound is another area where the sound designers I know get a lot of work because they have a skill that's a little harder to find. I would always joke that like at our game events, the programmers only know programmers, so it's like finding water in a desert when they find an artist. Same for artists looking for programmers, and then they meet up and then they start making stuff and they say to each other, do you know any sound people? And they don't, because sound people are rare. So sound design is a really awesome field to be in if you have the chops to do it. But if you are not a sound person like me, what do you do? Well, so a few things you can do. One is finding and sourcing sounds. And for that, it's good to know about sound libraries, which are collections of sound effects for use by animators or game designers. Now, that's basically it. They're collections of pre-made stuff. You want to be careful with these because if you go to something like, Kevin MacLeod's Incompetech.com, you're going to hear a piece of music like all over the place because you're like, oh, everybody uses that website. And so like Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech they're a little bit of a punchline that people use with each other because we've all used that music, but we all also use that music. So it's like a self-referential. It's not an own on that website or that guy. It's like a cell phone on ourselves to be like, we use that music. Mostly because we all know that we all use the music. But like, at the same time, if you're hurting for sound or music, you can go to one of these places like freesound.org or soundbible.com and you can get stuff. And it is good to fill in with, again, student projects. If you don't have access to a sound designer, which you do, you just got to take the step to link up with them. Professional outfits will also often use paid sound libraries. Now, these are kind of expensive, but they're expensive because they're related to like digital rights. So, anytime that you are working with a sound designer, there are different levels of exclusivity where, there are times where like you have a sound designer and they make sounds for you, but that you can maybe pay a lower price if you agree that those sounds belong to the sound designer to use on whatever they want. And the same accounts for music. So it's a way to save money, but you kind of have to understand like this may not be the only place that you'll hear this sound. Ben's sound is a good one. Okay, I'll remember that. I knew it, like I'm probably forgetting a million of them. But yeah, Ben's sound. I've heard of that one. So the paid ones are usually because you're paying for licensing. And because this is somebody's creative work, like this is a real thing, and this is all this is a real field of study and professional work. So this is also why I'm not doing a lecture on like fully how to, because it's a major at this university. So like understand, like respect the professionals who are trained to do this. I'm not saying you don't, but you know what I mean. It's like acknowledge that this is like a real thing, and it'll help you like collaborate. Basically, like at this point, you're almost collaborating with somebody else in a different field. So paid are nice. Again, they're not original or bespoke, but you're going to get higher quality and some exclusivity rights. Where otherwise, if you go to free sound, hey. This is why the Wilhelm scream is a sort of like in joke, because everybody uses the Wilhelm scream because it's this public domain sound effect that everybody knows. So it's almost like it was everywhere because it was accessible. Then it became everywhere because it became an inside joke. So, you know. But sound libraries are really useful. Understand them, know them, use them. The other thing is working with sound designers. Again, this is a whole profession. I'm not going to try to encapsulate the entirety of the profession in one lecture. But what do sound designers do? Well, they record and edit sounds for you. And that recording, they can either work with sound libraries and then like modify those sound libraries to give you the sound you want, or they can, I know a lot of sound designers who are also Foley artists, which is a sound artist who creates sounds from real world sources. So, you know, for example, here, this is a recording studio for like a radio drama, and this woman she has a bunch of stuff around her with which to make the sound effects for the radio drama as it's happening. You know, musicians you'll see this anytime there's a thing like, how did they make the lightsaber sound? And they have like, I mixed together these 4 things that I came up with. I have friends who will take like a violin bow and then just like run it along different objects in their room. Like I have a buddy who was like, yeah, I bowed my laundry rack and then I recorded the sound and I mixed it and I got this laser, you know, things like that. So Foley artists are like geniuses. They're mad scientists and they're amazing. And that, again, that's why you work with them. I also know I have friends who will like buy different recording equipment. So, you know, they'll have like their nice professional recording equipment, but they might buy like, hey, I found this tape recorder from the 1950s, and it gives me like a nice scratchiness or something like that. I'm friends with the sound designer for the game Hyperlight Drifter, and he, you know, that was literally what he did. Like he was also the guy that did the violin bow on his laundry rack. But, you know, he would just walk around a place and like record with this old recorder to get that sort of like richness that it would give it. So, you know, this is what a sound designer can give you, is they can give you that level of care and richness that you might not get when you're just downloading a bunch of set stuff. I've also seen some discussion about tools for audio, so I thought I'd throw some out. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but ones that I know that people use that you might consider using. There's a good video on YouTube about Foley in the Quiet Place that's pretty good, so I'll have to go check that out. So the one everybody uses, and I know that there's been discussion of like, oh, there's got to be something better. Most people use Audacity, and it's not the best tool, but it's actually a very well trusted tool. I don't think it's particularly user friendly in the way that it seems like it's just a really good recorder, but if you actually go down the rabbit hole of Audacity, there's a lot that it can do. It's more powerful than you think, but it requires some research and doing. There's another tool for Macs called Fission, which is worth checking out. But the Pro tool, the professional tools that I'm aware of people using are Pro Tools and Adobe Audition. If you have Creative, I almost called it Creative Suite. If you have Creative Cloud, you should have access to Adobe Audition. But that is a pretty decent sound recorder and mixer. It's not sound specific, but if you do need to cut some stuff together, good old-fashioned Premiere is good in a pinch. But I say that as not a sound person, so I'm probably saying something that's blasphemous. Audacity really only allows destructive editing. All modifier you apply to a sound clip are permanent, and you can't go back and adjust the settings without starting over on the sound clip. Yeah, and that's the trouble with Audacity. It is very much a you get what you pay for situation. So Adobe Audition it lets you layer stuff on in a less destructive way. But, you know, again, you've got to have access to it. So these are just a list of ones that I have found and that I'm familiar with. But, you know, yeah, it. There's a lot of lists of, best softwares if you really want to dive down the rabbit hole, I guess. But these are the ones that I'm aware of, like a lot of people using. So music, real quick, let's go through music. The role of music: set emotional context, mirror and support the rise and fall of action, and provide additional context to your scene. So think about like if it's a happy scene in a movie, but the character has like a secret. You might have like a sinister undertone every time you see this character on screen. You kind of like get uneasy about them. That music can provide that contrast to the action on screen that can be really important. So again, not a musician, but I can talk about planning for music. And so you may have seen these things online. Let's think about Mary Poppins. So there's this video online that takes footage from Mary Poppins and cuts it and lays different music on top of it. So instead of like Happy Mary Poppins, you get Scary Mary. So again, I've shared these in the Discord, in the animation share channel. So it's worth going and taking a look. But you can vastly change the quality of footage by, obviously there's an amount of editing there, but with also very different sound cues. Same thing with this famous movie, The Shining. The original Shining is a scary movie where Jack Nicholson is haunted by a evil hotel and, tries to kill his family. But there's also a Shining cut as a romantic comedy trailer that, they go for it. They do like Peter Gabriel Salisbury Hill level of going for it. And it makes you think like, wow, what a relaxing feel-good movie. No, The Shining is terrifying and brilliant. But, you can very much change the emotional context of footage with the right kind of music. There's another video which I've shared that talks about the soundtracks of the Marvel movies. And it's based on the thesis of why don't you remember music from the Marvel movies? And like the Avengers has a distinct theme. And if I stop and really think about it and like play back certain scenes in my head, a few bars of it can come out. But, it's not Star Wars, The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, these other movies where it's like, hey, hum the theme from Jaws. People will be like, da-na, da-na, right away. So why is that? Well, you got to understand that music sets the tone of a scene, but again, there's this thing in media where the thing you got to understand in media is like, what are the powers of each different piece of media? And we've talked about this. And what do those powers allow you to do? And what's interesting is that, like before comics, there were pictures and there were text. And pictures, like text could describe things and pictures could show things. And sometimes you'd have text and pictures next to each other, such as to illustrate a book. So, usually the way it would work is like you could have, like Alice is doing this as she falls down the rabbit hole, picture of Alice falling down the rabbit hole kind of thing. But then when comics came and you juxtapose to like arrange such that they are near one another, and possibly contrasted with one another, people started to experiment with the juxtaposition of text and images, such that like how is the action shown in an image different from the emotion, like the dialogue happening. And you can start to do really interesting things if you have one slightly contrast the other. So you can have a character like giving a speech, but then it shows them about to get hit over the head, or a character about to enter the room and upend everything, right? And that creates really interesting moments. So, when you get into film, what do you have? You have dialogue, you have imagery, you have music, you have sound. And the music versus the dialogue versus the image can create these contrasts that again become really, really interesting. So, that you're watching a woman at the beginning of Jaws, like tread water, going for a nice night swim. You're like, okay, yeah, this is a nice peaceful thing. And then they do like a shot of her from under the water, and then they do like da-na, da-na. This isn't exactly how it happens. Jaws is one of my favorite movies, so, but like they start playing those low string notes, and you're like, oh no, she's about to get eaten. And that contrast between like the person not knowing she's about to get eaten, but then maybe like sinister music and then the shots from under the water kind of communicate something to you, the viewer, and then make you remember that in a way that you wouldn't if it was like, she is happy, the music is happy. Like that's a little too easy. So what you see is what you get. Again, quotes from this video that I shared. The music just tells you what's in the picture. That can be very dangerous. It can be nice in certain scenes, but you're not going to remember the music in that scene. And that's why they argue you don't remember any music from Marvel movies, because it is, what it is what you see, what you get. And they call that a really safe way to score a film. There's also this concept called temp music, and I bring this up because, again, if this is a lecture on how to work with sound designers, they hate temp music. Friends of mine, I've asked friends of mine about this, they're like, what temp music is it's music cut over imagery that indicates to an artist what the scene should sound like. So it's like if you were to set... if you were to make a video game and then you grab first level music from Kirby and put it over your video game, and then you told somebody, hey, it should sound like Kirby, they'll, you're basically telling them like, remake this, but don't, obviously copy, your intent is to make something that sounds like this, but then what ends up happening is that you as the non-musical person will spend a year with this music over your game or over your animation, and then you'll start to think this is what the right music is, and then you end up with something that is so similar that it doesn't have its own identity, and then it kind of becomes samey. So composers don't like this because it creates this homogeneous soundscape in movies. And if you really look at movies, they all are using temp music from each other. So like something from the Avengers maybe used, another action movie as a sound-alike, and then something like Mad Max takes music from the Avengers, and then somebody uses music from Mad Max, and then suddenly all movies sound the same. So movies and games, this is why they sound like each other, and this is why you don't remember a lot of music scores from the last 10 years or so. But I bet you can remember, you can like hear this image in your head, right? And that's because because it's a GIF, I'm gonna turn off my camera. That's because, this image, there's a few reasons for this. One is that movies did not have orchestral soundtracks in the 70s anymore. They had gone out of style, so that scores came back and had orchestral sounds. It was a big deal. But you have this like da 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 da, this march happening. The text and the motion creates this moment that, like, every time I go to a theater and see a Star Wars movie, you see A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, and you're just like, you're get revved up. And that's because you're about to have this moment where the music the image are so perfect, because even if you expect it, it's this grand moment, right? And that's because you have the title and the fanfare happening, and that's a contrast. As much as we're used to it, that actually is something that is a contrast to, like this could be underplayed very easily, and even like the Mandalorian kind of does this, where it shows you Star Wars, but it's kind of like duh, like a Marvel movie. And there's a lot of moments that are good in the Mandalorian, but we think of just mainly Star Wars coming out of it. So it's important to think about, like, when you are talking with sound designers or audio people, to really if you talk in emotions, if you talk in like, I'd like this to feel optimistic or light or tense, other than, or to give them an idea of the story, they will like that much better than being like, oh, just make it sound like Call of Duty, something like that, or Halo, right? Halo has a great soundtrack, actually. I love Halo's soundtrack. So those are the important parts of working with sound people. Any questions before we head out? All right, I'm not seeing questions, so I'm going to sign off. To everybody, that's, like I said, that's the last lecture. We will from now on be kind of, if you need to chat with me, I'm happy to do appointments via Discord. We can do screen share. But other than that, have a great Thanksgiving if I don't talk to you. But I will see you later, and stay safe and well, everybody. Take care of each other. Bye.